Good morning and welcome to the NPTEL course titled Postmodernism and Literature. Our lecture today is titled Hyperreality and DeLillo's Postmodernist Fiction, a discussion of white noise. As the title implies, this lecture is a discussion of white noise, one of the typical postmodernist novels of the contemporary. And this lecture also needs to be seen in the context of the discussions that we had been having in the last few weeks. We had first introduced you to a number of postmodern theories and a number of postmodern formulations within which certain postmodernist texts could be read, analyzed and understood. So, this needs to be seen in that larger context, and I would also like to tell you right at the outset that we do not intend to provide a detailed summary of the novel. So, it would be very helpful if you read the novel White Noise well in advance and then try to make sense of the discussion. And even if you have not really read the novel yet, it would be very helpful if you use this discussion as an entry point to understand the novel and also to engage with the novel as part of postmodernist fiction. Having said that, I now introduce to you the novelist Donald Richard Don DeLillo. He was born in 1936. He is the author of 14 novels and is considered as a representative figure of American postmodern fiction. DeLillo's novels are very unique. They encourage us to think about the Cold War, environment and terrorism, and his fiction also seems to anticipate and comment on certain cultural trends and tendencies. It is a mix of a very serious commentary as well as a playful engagement with the postmodern world that we find in DeLillo's fiction. And his fiction is particularly unique in this aspect that there is a repeated invitation to think historically. And this precisely goes against the argument that Jameson had put forward in his Marxist critique of postmodernism, that in this postmodernist age it is no longer possible to think historically. DeLillo's fiction, particularly in White Noise also, we find that he is one of those very few people who encourage us to see a postmodern as a historical period and encourage us to repeatedly historicize irrespective of the ways in which the age defies all kinds of historical conventions. It is said about DeLillo that he is one of those writers who conceive their vocation as an art of cultural criticism. In that sense, he also joins a league with Herman Melville, Mark Twain and Thomas Pynchon, who also have been extremely critical of their home front, which is America. The novel White Noise, which happens to be the 8th novel written by DeLillo, was published in 1985. It is considered as one of the most frequently taught post-war novels, and the publication of the novel happened at a very interesting juncture in history. It coincided with a great academic interest in the ideas of Baudrillard and other theorists of postmodernism, and we also notice how the 1980s were extremely influential in foregrounding the theories of postmodernism that we are now familiar with. There is yet another distinction to this novel White Noise. It has also been seen as very prophetic in that sense. It appeared just weeks after the Bhopal gas tragedy happened in India. So, we also find a resonance in that sense, though it happens inadvertently, between the novel and certain geopolitical events which were happening in different parts of the world. This novel particularly shows how America became postmodern. It is in that sense a journey through a certain protagonist and certain family who become representatives of postmodern American life. And this novel is also one of the celebrated novels of the contemporary. It was included in the Time list of best English language novels from 1923 to 2005. It is also one of the most popular works by the author Don DeLillo. So, in this discussion throughout the references will be given from DeLillo's work, which was the edition which was published in 2011. I also draw extensively from the Cambridge Companion to Don DeLillo, published in 2008 by the Cambridge University Press. Let me try to provide a very brief outline of the novel White Noise. It is set in a Midwestern college known as the College on the Hill. It is set in a small American town, and it also details the academic year and the life of the protagonist Jack Gladney. This is the structure of the novel. It is split into 40 chapters. The first part is named Waves and Radiation. The second part is the airborne toxic event, and the third part is named Dilarama. The second part is the shortest of all the sections, and altogether it is said about this novel that in his writing, in DeLillo's writing, a symptom, a diagnosis or an endorsement of the condition of postmodernity could be found. The novel moves around two major plot points, the first one being an airborne toxic event, and the second one is Jack's discovery. He is a protagonist. Jack's discovery of his wife's participation in an experimental study of a new psychopharmaceutical called DeLillo to cure her of the fear of dying. So it is very postmodernist in that sense. It also in a certain way follows certain conventional narrative tropes and narrative techniques, but at the same time it makes use of a number of postmodernist elements to expose the ways in which America has become postmodern to such an extent that an entire family lives in a hyper-real parodied situation. We are being introduced to the protagonist right from the beginning of the novel. The protagonist, Jack Gladney, also happens to be the narrator. He is very interestingly, he is positioned as the chairman of the Department of Hitler Studies at the College on the Hill, and in his own words, I invented Hitler Studies in North America in March of 1968. And ironically, he is also a protagonist who is an expert in Hitler Studies, but he has not taken German lessons yet. But the others in the department are well versed in German. That's also a concern that he personally has throughout the novel. And we are also introduced to the Gladney household, in his own words, Babette and I and our children by previous marriages. That's what comprises of the Gladney household. He's married 5 times, he has 4 stepchildren, and television is also an important character in the novel because the Gladney household continually evince the effects of massive television exposure. I would like to read to you an excerpt from the novel where his fascination with Hitler Studies and his positioning in the college as such is being talked about by one of his colleagues, Murray. And this is what Murray says to Gladney: "That's exactly what I want you to talk about. You've established a wonderful thing here, Hitler. You created it, you nurtured it, you made it your own. Nobody on the faculty of any college or university in this part of the country can do so much as utter the word Hitler without a nod in your direction, literally or metaphorically. This is the center, the unquestioned source. He is now your Hitler, Gladney's Hitler. It must be deeply satisfying for you. The college is internationally known as a result of Hitler Studies. It has an identity, a sense of achievement. You've evolved an entire system around this figure, a structure with countless substructures and interrelated fields of study, a history within history. I marvel at the effort. It was masterful, shrewd, and stunningly preemptive. It's what I want to do with Elvis." It's a very interesting juxtaposition of Hitler and Elvis Presley in the same passage. Here we also shown how Hitler and Elvis Presley can become nearly interchangeable figures in this culture of celebrities. And we are also being shown rather sarcastically how a certain paradigm shift has come about in the academia, in the ways in which particular departments, particular disciplines and certain kinds of historical figures emerge as the center. In today's discussion, I draw your attention to certain aspects which I find are predominantly postmodernist, and in that sense it is important for us to begin with the idea of the real in the novel. In the novel, in the course of the progression of the plot, we come across an event where Jack Gladney's family is supposed to be evacuated as a result of an airborne toxic event. There is a certain organization named SIMUVAC. It stands for Simulated Evacuation. They conduct simulated evacuations in America, and that's also presented as a reality which is also very ironic in nature. And here we find one of the officers of the SIMUVAC. Here he is talking about a real evacuation incident and also tries to pass it off as a simulated event. According to his own words, we thought we could use it as a model, a chance to use a real event in order to rehearse a simulation. We find a very direct and overt reference to Baudrillard's simulation over here. And we also find that the real and the hyperreal get merged in the novel, and there is an inability for us to know why the simulation or the rehearsal is being passed off as a real evacuation event. And here we also find a certain kind of a reversal of cause and effect. Simulation becomes the original event of which reality is a mere imitation. And this is also something that Baudrillard had been warning us against in his discussion of the simulacra and the simulation. We also find certain ways in which this has been getting replicated in multiple ways in the culture of America and also in the postmodern consumerist culture. There are also a number of other instances in the novel where we find the real and the hyperreal merging into a single point. One of them being a passing reference to a Moorish movie theatre that has become a mosque. Then we come across a Hollywood version taken for the real thing. There are also certain nuns, particularly we are introduced to one who fake their belief to correspond to people's sentimental fantasy of what a nun should be. I would like to read to you from that passage in the novel. And in this edition, the episode with the nun comes towards the end of the novel in page 367. And Jack Gladney meets this particular nun, and he expects a certain kind of a rhetoric, a certain kind of a behavior from the nun, and he asks about heaven, he asks about divinely things, but the nun responds in a very ironic, humorous and an indifferent way, much to the shock of Jack Gladney. And this is also a very postmodernist in a certain way. I read to you from this passage. The nun talks. Our pretense is a dedication. Someone must appear to believe. Our lives are no less serious than if we professed real faith, real belief. As belief shrinks from the world, people find it more necessary than ever that someone believe. Wild-eyed men in caves, nuns in black, monks who do not speak, we are left to believe. Fools, children. Those who have abandoned belief must still believe in us. They are sure that they are right not to believe, but they know how belief must not fade completely. Hell is when no one believes. There must always be believers. Fools, idiots, those who hear voices, those who speak in tongues. We are your lunatics. We surrender our lives to make your non-belief possible. You are sure that you are right, but you don't want everyone to think as you do. There is no truth without fools. We are your fools, your mad women, rising at dawn to pray, lighting candles, asking statues for good health, long life. She rattled out a laugh, showing teeth so old they were nearly transparent. And here we are being introduced to a certain sarcastic and ironic view of religion, where even one loses faith in God, even one loses faith in the religious systems. There's a certain way in which you expect certain kind of a register, a certain kind of a presentation of figures of persons such as nuns, and such an attitude is entirely being mocked at in this novel throughout, right from the beginning. And we also find certain instances where experiences are no longer immediate but always mediated through other prior experiences. A sense of deja vu, other prior experiences. For example, the novel talks about a sense of deja vu of a sense of deja vu. And in this novel, in the 2011 edition, in page 146, there is a discussion of a confusion about whether something has really happened, whether it is reality or whether it's a sense of deja vu. So I read to you this excerpt from page 146. What did it all mean? Did Steffi truly imagine she had seen the wreck before, or did she only imagine she'd imagined it? Is it possible to have a false perception of an illusion? Is there a true deja vu and a false deja vu? I wondered whether her palms had been truly sweaty or whether she had simply imagined a sense of wetness. And was she so open to suggestion that she would develop every symptom as it was announced? Here we find the novel playing with the idea of reality in multiple ways, and it would be possible to look at this from the discussions generated by Baudrillard and his concept of hyperreality, and also about how the real and the fake, the real and the illusion, the distinction between them collapses to such an extent that there is an inability for us to know which is real and which one is a simulated effect. There are also a series of juxtapositions which the novel comically uses, and this is very comically disconcerting as well. For example, in page 8 of the novel, there is this small passage. The smoke alarm went off in the hallway upstairs, either to let us know the battery had just died or because the house was on fire. We finished our lunch in silence. Here, look at the way in which the term or is being placed very casually over here without really discriminating between the cause and effect of both of these events, of either the battery just dying or the house being on fire. This is the postmodern irony or the postmodern juxtaposition of placing disconcerting facts simultaneously. And here the narrator also deludes us into believing that he does not really care whether the battery had just died or whether the house was on fire, because both supposedly have only the same kind of consequence according to him. And this is the postmodern approach that the novel takes throughout. There is also a way in which irony and humour also appear to have a disconcerting effect on the reader. We realize that there is a constant fear of death that Jack Gladney's wife Babette has throughout the novel, and there is also this repeated discussion that they have about who will die first. Who will die first, he adds. This question comes up from time to time, like where are the car keys? And again, this is yet another juxtaposition, as if death and car keys were of the same order of significance. It really doesn't matter whether it is about death or whether it is about the lost car keys. So these sort of placing side by side ironic elements and elements which may not normally go well together. This is again a way in which postmodernism is at work in this narration. Now we come to one of the most discussed scenes in postmodern fiction, which is part of a significant episode in the novel White Noise. And this is an episode which has generally been described as the episode of the most photographed barn. Here we find the novelist displaying the astute insights of a critic well versed in theories of postmodernism. And this is in fact an episode, a scene where Jack is taken by a fellow academic, Murray J. Siskind, and he also teaches popular culture in the same department. And Murray invites Jack to see this most photographed barn in America. That's how the site is generally known. And this is in fact also a tourist equivalent of a celebrity who is famous for being famous. For instance, and Murray also educates Jack on how this has become the most photographed barn in America, because it is no longer possible to see the reality of the barn itself, because all that they can see is the tourist cliche, and that the point of experience is not the barn itself, but the way it is mediated through other people's reactions, because we do not really see the barn. No one sees the barn according to the novel. People are taking pictures of taking pictures, because only if you take pictures of people taking pictures of the barn, you get to claim that you've actually seen the most photographed barn in America. And this excerpt where this discussion about the most photographed barn happens in the novel has been oft discussed as a case of a hyperreality, as a way in which America has become a victim of this sort of a consumerist culture, to such an extent that it becomes impossible to see the object. One only sees a mediated object which has been mediated heavily by the global consumerist perception. We find the character Murray telling Jack when he is taking him to see the most photographed barn, once you've seen the signs about the barn, it becomes impossible to see the barn. It is this impossibility that Baudrillard had already warned us against when it comes to seeing the contemporary America, because contemporary America is also mediated by a lot of these significations from part of the global consumerist culture. I quote extensively from the novel where Murray is talking to Jack. What was the barn like before it was photographed? What was the barn like before it was photographed? What does it look like? How is it different? We can't answer these questions because we've read the signs, seen the people snapping the pictures. We can't get outside the aura. We are part of the aura. Postmodern theorists also talk about a certain aura which gives a lot of value to certain objects in the postmodern period. And once the object is, once we get used to seeing the object within an aura, it becomes impossible to see the object itself for what really it is. So no one sees the barn in this context, and this also becomes an irrevocable substitution of the fake for the real. And this is also a sharp satire on the way in which objects are being objectified and objects are being converted into certain consumable products in the contemporary particularly in America. And this cannot be seen as a case limited to America. It could be said that it is true with most of the modernized, globalized cultures in the contemporary. Taking off from this discussion related to the most photographed barn in DeLillo's novel, Philip Nell, one of the contemporary critiques of DeLillo's fiction, he makes this remark: as with the barn itself, it is virtually impossible to remember what reading DeLillo was like before he came to be engulfed by the aura of postmodernism. This statement is very telling, because even in this discussion, we begin with the pre-given verdict that DeLillo's fiction is essentially postmodernist, that white noise is mostly about hyperreality in the American context. So here, even in the critical reading of the novel White Noise, we cannot approach the novel in a neutral way without really knowing what it is to read White Noise without being conscious of the postmodernist elements in it. Now, whether the postmodernist elements were built in knowingly or whether it's there inadvertently, now there's an impossibility for us as a reader to eliminate the postmodern identification of the novel White Noise, because it has been always already seen as a postmodernist novel, and we have no way of knowing how it is to read the novel without seeing it under the aura of postmodernism. Coming to certain aspects of the novel which I would like to highlight in this discussion, the television emerges like almost a central character in the novel White Noise. The television is always on and in that sense omnipresent in the Jack Gladney household, and on Friday evenings we are also given to understand that the Gladneys went together. The Gladneys band together in front of the television, and there they sit worshipfully silent, totally absorbed and attentive to our duty. So it also talks about how television emerges as a culture, as a unifying culture within the family, no matter how disturbing that is a knowledge in the postmodern scenario. And there is also a sense in which we are being given to a certain, we are being subjected to a certain repetitious brand name mantras, such as there are repeated references to the Airport Marriott, the Downtown Travelodge, the Sheraton Inn and the Conference Center, Dacron, Orlon and the Lycra Spandex, leaded, unleaded, super leaded versions of different products, and also about MasterCard, Visa, American Express. These sort of images are being continually being woven into the narrative. We are not even conscious that these are brand names which become part of the narrative. And this commercial culture, this television and ad saturated culture, they have infiltrated their way so much into Jack's stream of consciousness that he cannot seem to escape from this inevitable reality. And again, it brings us back to the original point. It becomes also difficult to differentiate reality from the simulated things that he comes across in his day-to-day life. And there is this very significant instance in this novel where Jack's daughter mutters Toyota Celica in her dreams, and that is also an advertisement that she had been continually seeing during the daytime through the television and the car radio ads. And here we find that her innermost sanctum of individuality has been taken over by the language of advertising, and she is totally immersed in the flow of media imagery. It becomes impossible for her to differentiate between the reality that she encounters and the reality which is being fed into her through these mediations of advertisements and television images. White Noise in that sense could be considered as a novel fashioned from the ready materials of culture, particularly American culture. And we find the novel ridden with advertising slogans, rock lyrics and snippets of television and film. It also has a generous discussion of literature and philosophical traditions as well, and it is also very conscious of the traditions and the philosophies that it makes use of in the narrative. This we also notice the way in which the novel talks about Hitler studies as a department or about the presentation of the most photographed barn in America. There is yet another way in which the novel celebrates the postmodernism that it talks about. There is no difference between high art and mass culture. In fact, there is a refusal to distinguish between media culture and high culture, a refusal to discriminate one or exclude one from the other. This is something that we saw in the way in which Hitler and Elvis Presley were mentioned in the same breath in the same passage. Here we find a way in which the consumer culture comes into contact with high art, and it becomes difficult for us to differentiate one from the other. We find the discussions of Wittgenstein, Proust and Joyce, who are philosophers and writers of the high art. We also find discussions of Bob Dylan. We find a way in which Hollywood films and altruistic films are mentioned side by side. We also find Andy Warhol and his iconic image infiltrating into this discussion as well. And there are also certain characters who serve as examples of media saturation taken to comic execs. For example, the narrator Jack Gladney himself and also the character of Willie Mink. We find that the novel critiques the frenzied appetites of consumerism. There is a certain instance in the novel where a rack of novels is knocked over in the supermarket and the books tend to spill over the floor. And here we are being given to understand that fiction is just one more barcoded item in the supermarket. There is hardly anything superior to the literary work compared to the many other items which are available in the supermarket. So, fiction is reduced to just another barcoded item which is available in the supermarket. We find a lot of discussions where DeLillo and Baudrillard are mentioned together, and for obvious reasons. Leonard Wilcox, one of the leading critics of DeLillo's fiction, he writes, while Baudrillard finds nothing outside the play of simulations, no real in which a radical critique of the simulational society might be grounded, DeLillo believes that narrative can provide critical distance from and a critical perspective on the processes it depicts. Here we find Baudrillard and DeLillo being discussed in the same breath and also highlighting the ways in which one differs from the other. In a very postmodern rhetoric, we also find that there is no regard to the fact that Baudrillard is a philosopher and DeLillo is a fiction writer. And the genre differences do not seem to play any role in this discussion, because what becomes important is the representation that both of them hold forth, what Baudrillard talks about and what DeLillo talks about. The genre ceases to be important, the time frame ceases to be important. What becomes important is that it is possible to talk about a philosopher and a fiction writer in the same passage and also look at how both of them engage with the postmodern world in different ways. How, while one refuses to see anything outside simulation, the other makes use of narrative to critique the contemporary, critique the outside world the way he finds it. There are a couple of things which the novel engages with in a very interesting manner. It talks about the fear of death as a real fear which could also be addressed through scientific methods. There is Babette, Jack Gladney's wife, who is constantly under the fear of death, and she also begins to take a certain medicine to cure her of this fear. So, I read this passage to you. We stood there, watching a surge of florid light, like a heart pumping in a documentary on color TV. Remember the saucer-shaped pill? Of course, she said, a super piece of engineering. I found out what it's designed to do. It's designed to solve an ancient problem, fear of death. It encourages the brain to produce fear of death inhibitors. But we still die. Everyone dies, yes. We just won't be afraid, she said. That's right. Interesting, I guess. DeLillo was designed by a secret research group. I believe some of these people are psychobiologists. I wonder if you've heard rumors about a group working secretly on fear of death. I would be the last to hear. No one can ever find me. When they do find me, it's to tell me something important. What could be more important? You're talking about gossip, rumors. This is thin stuff, Jack. Who are these people? Where is their base? That's why I've been chasing you. I thought you'd know something about them. I don't even know what a psychobiologist is. It's a catch-all sort of thing, interdisciplinary. The real work is in the pits. Isn't there anything you can tell me? Here we see how, in a very postmodernist way, a number of dissimilar things are being brought under the discussion in the same passage. There is fear of death. There is also a certain new interdisciplinary field called psychobiology, and we also find that there is a certain kind of a medicine which claims to cure the fear of dying. So, in a very postmodernist sense, we are being presented all of these things as facts which are at the same level. We are not being allowed to wonder, we are not being allowed to mock, there is no ironic tone either. So, this is a way in which the postmodernist fiction makes use of the narrative technique to talk about things without really betraying any sense of irony or any sense of mock satire. Let me also read to you a passage in the novel where DeLillo talks about the academic setting in a very satirical way. He talks about the conferences as part of the Hitler Studies Center. He uses this as an entry point to talk about the ways in which in the contemporary the academic setting functions. I read from the novel. This is from page 314. Delegates to the Hitler conference began arriving. About 90 Hitler scholars would spend the 3 days of the conference attending lectures, appearing on panels, going to movies. They would wander the campus with their names lettered in Gothic type on laminated tags pinned to their lapels. They would exchange Hitler gossip, spread the usual sensational rumors in the last days in the Führer bunker. It was interesting to see how closely they resembled each other despite the wide diversity of national and regional backgrounds. They were cheerful and eager, given to spitting when they laughed, given to outdated dress, homeliness, punctuality. They seemed to have a taste for sweets. So, we find a very interesting description, a satirical description being given about academic centers and the practice of academics in the contemporary. As we begin to wind up, I also leave you with this interesting description of a family and how the family becomes a central discussion point in the novel. I read to you from page 97 where there is this extensive rumination about family. The family is a cradle of the world's misinformation. There must be something in the family life that generates factual error, over closeness, the noise and heat of being, perhaps something even deeper like the need to survive. Murray says we are fragile creatures surrounded by a world of hostile facts. Facts threaten our happiness and security. The deeper we delve into the nature of things, the looser our structure may seem to become. The family process works towards sealing off the world. Small errors grow heads, fictions proliferate. I tell Murray that ignorance and confusion can't possibly be the driving forces behind family solidarity. What an idea! What a subversion! He asks me why the strongest family units exist in the least developed societies. Not to know is a weapon of survival, he says. Magic and superstition become entrenched as a powerful orthodoxy of the clan. The family is strongest where objective reality is most likely to be misinterpreted. What a heartless theory, I say. But Murray insists it's true. In the novel White Noise, that DeLillo chooses to narrate the story in the backdrop of a family, in the backdrop of a number of things which are part of everyday life in the contemporary world is very interesting. And he also opens up the discussion, opens up the avenue for criticism and also for leading us to look at the ways in which fiction also coexists with the many theoretical formulations of the postmodern age. The novel, we can say, that resonates well with a number of postmodern theorists, and it's also possible to read this novel in connection with the many critiques which were formulated by Jameson. It also engages in a very extensive powerful dialogue with Baudrillard through the discussions of simulation and hyperreality, and we are also introduced the pressures of living in a culture dominated by advertising and simulation. As we begin to wind up this discussion, I also leave you with a set of questions for self-study which would be useful as you begin to read the novel on your own. What are the postmodernist elements in White Noise? Comment on the looming presence of death in the novel. This is also something which which could be seen as a repeated trope in a number of postmodernist works. What is the role of the television or car radio novel? You could also use Hyperreality and Baudrillard's works as an entry point to access this question. What is the role of family in the postmodern condition that White Noise portrays? This can be seen in contrast to the ways in which the postmodern narratives reject all kinds of meta-narratives, and how there is an inevitability, how there is an impossibility to completely move away from the meta-narratives, but also how it becomes possible to stay within some of these institutions, some of these meta-narratives, and then critique them and subvert them in different ways. In fact, whatever the theories propose to do in their realms, we find the novel writing out an entire script, staging a number of debates which are part of a lot of theoretical formulations. And also, how is it possible to use Baudrillard's theory of hyperreality to understand white noise? It would be a good exercise to identify a number of other instances more than the ones that we have discussed in the course of this lecture. And finally, would you like to compare white noise with Travels in Hyperreality by Umberto Eco? Umberto Eco's work is not entirely fiction. It's almost like a documentary fiction. It talks about his journey through the contemporary American culture. So, how would you find white noise resonating with certain things that Eco also talks about in his work Travels in Hyperreality? There could be many other ways in which white noise could be accessed as a postmodernist novel. As I begin to wind up this discussion, let me also remind you that white noise is also a reference to the multimedia generated white noise which is infiltrating the contemporary globalized consumerized societies. I hope this would also help you to generate a newfound taste in reading postmodernist fiction. I thank you for listening and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.